Lenin versus Marx on the question of class consciousness. I've mentioned repeatedly that Lenin was not a very good Marxist, and this is a prime example as to why. Again, this is like the fourth time that I've referenced it, but it's so useful in clarifying Marxist doctrine. From 1845's The Holy Family, Chapter 4. When socialist writers describe this historic world of the proletariat, it is not at all as critical criticism pretends to believe, because they regard the proletarians as gods. Rather the contrary, since the fully formed proletariat, the abstraction of all humanity, even of the semblance of humanity, is practically complete, since the conditions of life of the proletariat sum up all the conditions of life in society today in their most inhuman form, since man has lost himself in the proletariat, yet at the same time has not only gained theoretical consciousness of that loss, but through urgent, no longer removable, no longer disguisable, absolutely imperative need, the practical expression of necessity is driven directly to revolt against this humanity. It follows that the proletariat can and must emancipate itself. Marx goes on to say, it is not a question of what the proletariat is, and what, in accordance with this being, it will historically be compelled to do. There is no need to explain here that a large part of the English and French proletariat is already conscious of its historic task and is working to develop that consciousness into complete clarity. Now, Marx didn't invent the doctrine of communism. He didn't even really invent certain phrases associated with it, like dialectical materialism. That term, for example, came from a German named, what the hell was his name? I can't think of it off the top of my head. Joseph Dietzgen, that's right. Dietzgen was a German worker. He wasn't college educated. He had no university. I think he worked as a tanner or a cobbler or something to that effect, but he came up with the term dialectical materialism, and he had read Hegel and some of the young Hegelians, and he developed this concept independently of Marx, and then they eventually linked up. Wilhelm Weitling, who was a Christian communist, but a fairly ideologically advanced one, also contributed some doctrine that Marx adopted, even though Marx did criticize him. And this man was also a worker. So communism is a product of the working class. However, Lenin disagrees. And what is to be done? He says that we have said that there could not have been social democratic consciousness among the workers. It would have to be brought to them from without. The history of all countries shows that the working class, exclusively by its own effort, is able to develop only trade union consciousness, i.e. the conviction that it is necessary to combine in unions, fight the employers, and strive to compel the government to pass necessary labor legislation. The theory of socialism, however, grew out of the philosophic, historical, and economic theories elaborated by educated representatives of the property classes, by intellectuals. By their social status, the founders of modern scientific socialism, Marx and Engels, themselves belonged to the bourgeois intelligentsia. But as I've shown, this isn't true. There was an entire communist movement before Marx came around. The only thing that Marx did was to clarify certain propositions drawing from Hegelian philosophy, and to provide it with a negative critique rather than a positive, utopian, forward-projecting concept of what the future would have to be like. Marx says that communism originates from the conditions that prevail at the end of capitalism. So Lenin's objectively wrong, and he's not only wrong, he is in contradistinction to Marx. Now, I'm aware that at some point down the line, Lenin tried to make up for this statement, but that's baked into basic Lenin's theory that you need the vanguard of the proletariat to come in and to actively propagate communist doctrine. You don't. The workers can largely either find out about it or can develop it on their own. You don't need Leninists. You don't need the official communist parties.